there's a second part to what Sid realized that helps answer that question truthfully and accurately.
Yeah.
Are we limited in our capacity to become aware of the fact that we get caught up in thinking that's not helpful?
Yeah.
And I'm going to answer no, but in order to understand that every human being has everything they need to wake up to truth already built into them, you have to understand what Sid realized next. So he comes home from this weekend, and he is just living in exalted feelings because he's living in feelings of understanding. For the first time, he understands how he became insecure, how he was insecure, how insecurity was just him innocently becoming more and more involved in his worry, his anxious thinking, his upset thinking, his self-judgmental thinking. I work with some people, they spend probably 20 hours a day caught up in that thinking, suffering terribly. And they've been told, well, it's genetic or it's biological or they don't know that they're innocently feeding that thinking constantly. So he's sitting in his living room, and his thinking is just flowing because now his insecure thinking and upset thinking and worried thinking and is just thought. And if it's natural for it to come and go if you don't give your attention to it and hold on to it. Like in Buddhism, they say the only source of suffering is clinging, attachment, holding. When you're not holding, you're in the flow. If you're deeply in the flow, that's nirvana. No attachment to any thought coming through. Fully present, fully awake, fully alive. So I'm reading my spiritual teachers and studying with spiritual teachers and going on meditation retreats and beginning to experience for myself the normalcy of having thought come and go and the difference between holding and being surrendered in the moment, being open in the moment, being in the flow of life. Very ordinary. Everybody's experienced it. Musicians count on it. Athletes count on it. Artists count on it. And when athletes or artists or musicians get caught up in their thinking, they experience creative blocks, they experience struggle, they experience difficulty, they lose their love and passion for what they're doing. But at any moment, we can wake up out of that difficulty. Okay. Sid's in his living room, sitting there. His wife and mother-in-law are in the kitchen, and they do what most people do. They both drop into a low mood and they start arguing. You have to realize every fight that happens in a relationship is two people in a low mood thinking it's a good time to talk about things. It's the only time people fight and argue and disagree and bang heads. Right? So he sees that happening, and now it's totally understandable. And he realizes that's what everybody in the world is innocently doing. Unknowingly, we drop into a low mood, we become opinionated, argumentative, wedded to our beliefs, thinking we're right, you're wrong, you got to change your mind to be like me because I'm right and I know. Right? So he starts laughing at the cosmic humor of, here's the human dilemma. Oh my gosh, unknowingly, innocently, we get caught up in low mood states. They heard him laughing. They assume he's laughing at them. They're pissed. They come into the living room, stand on both sides of a chair, and they go, "Okay, Sid, what do you think is so funny?" And now, put yourself in Sid's place for a moment. 9th grade education. He's experienced directly for himself the illusory nature of thought-created reality. And he's going to try to explain that to his wife and mother-in-law now. And he's going, how am I going to explain? It's all just thought in the moment. It's made up. It's arbitrary. It's created. He stands up and looks out the window. And all of a sudden, there's this big buzzing field of white light in front of him, and he felt like he got drawn into it. Lost all sense of ego, all sense of self, and there was nothing but seemingly infinite field of energy, full of aliveness. There was nothing but this feeling of being connected to the universe, a feeling of everything is perfect as it is, a feeling that would be impossible to explain. He had never had a feeling of this nature. If he talked about it, it would be ecstatic love or impossible to describe. There are many people who have had near-death experiences all over the world. They describe this same process. Go into a tunnel of light. I feel like I've lost my old, conditioned, cramped self. I feel open and expansive. I'm filled with love and compassion. So one time I said, Sid, did you have a near-death experience? And he said, well, I went into that. And in a near-death experience, at some point you go, okay, I'm coming back. And you don't go all the way through. He said, I went all the way through. Now, there is...
This sounds a little up there. Like, it sounds really crazy on first glance.
Well, it does.
No?
Well, of course, for anybody. Me too. Anybody. Yeah. And we can't put yourself now in the position of Sid's wife and mother-in-law standing there. And Sid, for 4 seconds, turns around, looks out the window. And when he looks back, he's radiant. He's crying. He says to his wife, Pat, I've come home. I'm free. I've transcended the boundaries of time, space, and matter. He had to look up the word transcend. He had no idea what it meant. It just came out. I've transcended the boundaries. He said, you and I are going to travel the world, and I'm going to share what I've realized with people, and it's going to change the whole field of psychology and psychiatry. Could you imagine being his mother-in-law or wife, hearing him talk that way? Or if you had a friend who suddenly fell over and then got back up and said, oh my God, Michael, you won't believe what I just experienced. And they could not deny that something extremely powerful had just happened to him. It wasn't intellectual. Physically, he changed. He looked different. He went back to work. After that weekend, he went to his locker at this pulp mill. The guy had a locker next to him for 13 years. He didn't recognize Sid. He had changed so much physically. If you imagine if I took out every bit of insecurity, every bit of unhappiness, and you're living in this feeling of deep well-being. I've seen clients who are clinically depressed have insights where they look 10 years younger. This scrunch, just suddenly they soften. They go, oh my God, I didn't know it was possible to feel this good. Well, that's all. He had a shift in consciousness or a insight or a realization. I don't care what you call it. He changed. He wasn't the same person. So people could say, well, I have no idea what your experience was, Sid. I'm very skeptical. But they couldn't be skeptical about the fact that he was a different person. And every single person noticed it. So he goes back to work and nothing bothered him anymore. He would do jobs that people used to hate. He said, I'll do it. I don't care. I'm fine with it. Pretty soon his boss's boss, he'd never done this before, asked Sid to come into his office and talk to him for 2 hours. And he opened up about how much difficulty he was having in his life and with his wife. And he walked out feeling much better because Sid just talked to him about what he was realizing to be true about thought, about experience, about we're all the same. We all think. We all can be aware of the fact we think. And that when we go beyond our personal thinking, it's called being fully present. It's not a big deal. It's very ordinary. When he had his enlightenment experience, he said it felt very ordinary. I just was free of concepts. Completely.
So is what you're saying that this man that was never really interested in psychology and spirituality had a kind of spontaneous realization, awakening. He saw something about the nature of the world, and that changed him, and then it impacted many others like you and your view on the world.
After it happened to him, he thought all he would have to do is go to 2 people and it would start spreading through the world. He'd go to a psychologist and say, I've discovered the secret to psychology. Right? It's not looking at the content of thinking, it's looking at where thinking comes from. Now physicists all agree with this. You and I are beings of energy, and we're living in a field of energy. And the field of energy is infinite. And out of that field of energy, things are created. That's the mystery of life.
When you say physicists all over the world agree with that, I need to dig a little bit into that. What do you mean that we're being of energy?
I talked to a biologist, famous biologist. This is after I started having my own insights into, just very simply, very ordinary. I used to worry a lot. I wouldn't call it worry. I'm a doctorate in psychology, and I'm a psychologist, but a lot of my thinking made me anxious. One time a friend of mine said, Dicken, I was telling him about this big problem, and how upset I was getting about the problem. And my friend said to me, Dicken, I don't think the problem is the problem. I think you're just a full-time worrier here. Yeah. I felt insulted. I'm not worrying. He says, what do you think you're doing? I'm thinking about very important things in my life. I have to. He says, well, Dicken, what would you call thinking that makes a person anxious? I was mortified. Oh, my gosh. So one of my very first insights, when I started listening to Sid, because he's just saying every human being thinks. We're constantly, mental activity is being created in us or we wouldn't be alive. We think we're a brain, but the brain is just the computer. You wouldn't call a computer unless it was connected to a source of energy. You wouldn't call it a computer. We have no problem saying there's some kind of energy that has to come into a machine to bring it to life so that it can compute. We have no problem saying there's music in the air all the time and we can't receive it until you get an instrument that can receive that subtle signal, and then you get music or TV, right? So Sid basically says, well, human beings are connected to an energy source, or you would be dead in an instant. There's something creating you, there's something beating your heart, there's something breathing you, there's something generating mental activity.